I never expected that one family dinner could rearrange my entire life. But that evening, under the chandelier's gold light, every word felt like a blade slicing through years of silence. I'm Dorothy Shaw, 34, an environmental engineer from Omaha. I had come home after 6 months of project travel, exhausted, hopeful, and a little lost. My parents had invited me to dinner, a family evening, my mother said sweetly over the phone. It sounded harmless. I even brought dessert, a lemon tart from the little bakery on Maple Street that she used to love. When I walked in, the house smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken. Warm, familiar, deceptive. My parents sat at opposite ends of the long oak table, as if we were strangers negotiating peace after years of quiet wars. My younger brother Ethan was already there, phone in hand, barely looking up. We exchanged small talk. About work, weather, my father's new hobby, golf, of course. My mother asked about that man I was seeing, though I hadn't mentioned anyone in months. I gave vague answers. She gave knowing smiles. The same old dance. But beneath the politeness, something pulsed, like static before a storm. Halfway through the meal, my mother set down her fork and looked at me with that too calm expression I'd learned to fear. "Dorothy," she said softly, "we need to talk about your living situation." My hand froze mid-air, fork hovering over mashed potatoes. "My what?" She folded her napkin neatly as if preparing for surgery. "You've been back in the city for a while. Your father and I feel it's time you find your own place again." I blinked. "I am looking. You said I could stay until—" My father cut in, his voice deep and steady, the kind that always meant finality. "We've decided to convert your room. We're setting it up for guests, maybe as a rental suite later. You can take the guest room for now, or move out." The clink of silverware stopped. Ethan looked up, finally interested. My mother avoided my eyes, sipping her wine. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had left this house years ago. Built a life, a career, independence. But when my last relationship imploded and my lease ended unexpectedly, they'd said, "Come home, honey. You'll always have a place here." Always. Apparently, always had an expiration date. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound cracked in my throat. "So you're evicting your daughter over a spare room?" "Don't dramatize it," my father said sharply. "You're too old to be living at home, Dorothy. You need stability. And independence." I wanted to tell him I had both once, before my ex drained my savings and walked away. Before my last project cut me from the roster. Before I returned home, not for comfort, but for survival. But I didn't. I just stared at the lemon tart between us, untouched. The silence stretched, tight and humming. Then Ethan muttered, "Guess it's official." "You've overstayed your welcome." My mother shot him a glare, but didn't disagree. The rest of dinner passed in hollow clinks and muted breaths. Afterward, I carried the dishes to the sink, out of habit, out of dignity. My hands shook as I rinsed plates, the scent of rosemary turning bitter in my nose. My reflection in the window looked like someone else. Someone cornered. Someone smaller. That night I sat on my childhood bed, surrounded by trophies and faded posters that no longer belonged to the woman I'd become. I kept hearing my father's voice. "You can take the guest room, or move out." It wasn't just a sentence. It was a verdict. When I turned off the light, the house felt foreign. Every creak, every shadow whispered, "You don't belong here anymore, and maybe..." They were right. Because as I lay there staring into the dark, one truth hit me harder than anything they'd said. I had been waiting for their permission to start over, and I didn't need it anymore. I didn't sleep that night, not a single hour. I just lay there, watching headlights crawl across the ceiling, ghosts of passing cars that had somewhere to go. Somewhere I didn't. At 5 a.m. I got up, pulled on a sweater, and went downstairs. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My parents' voices, last night's cold, polished sentences, still echoed in the walls. I made coffee. Not for comfort, for courage, because I'd decided I was leaving. But as the caffeine burned down my throat, I realized I had no plan. My savings were thin, My last paycheck from the environmental firm barely covered the loan I was paying off. Moving out wasn't just emotional. It was impossible. Then, while staring out at the backyard through the kitchen window, I saw something strange. The garden, my mother's pride, looked different. The tall hedges that once lined the fence were cut back, almost leveled. There was a wooden for sale stake leaning against the patio wall. I stepped outside, cold air biting my skin. The grass was wet from dew, and the air smelled faintly of soil and something metallic. And that's when I noticed the corner, where the old greenhouse used to stand when I was a kid. It was gone. In its place stood a small shed, brand new, unpainted, locked tight with a shiny padlock. It wasn't there 2 months ago. Something about it felt wrong, out of place. Before I could think more, the back door creaked. My mother appeared in her robe, holding her mug with both hands. "You're up early," she said softly, eyes avoiding mine. I couldn't sleep. I nodded toward the shed. "When did that go up?" "Oh, that. Your father wanted more storage. You know how he is with his tools." Her tone was too light. Too practiced. "Tools?" I repeated, stepping closer to the shed. "Mom, there was a greenhouse here for 20 years. "Yes, well," she interrupted quickly. "Things change." She turned back toward the house, clearly done with the conversation. But I stood there watching her go, feeling that uneasy pulse again, the same one from dinner. Later that morning I started packing. Clothes, books, the framed photo of me and Ethan as kids at the lake. Every box felt heavier than it should have. At some point, I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Was I running away again? Or finally walking out on people who'd already left me long ago? The guest room was smaller, colder. A single bed, bare walls. My mother knocked on the door frame around noon. "You can stay here until you find somewhere," she said carefully. "It's not personal, Dorothy. Your father just wants order in the house." "Order?" I repeated quietly. "That's what you call it now?" Her eyes softened for a second. "You've been lost since that breakup, sweetheart. He just doesn't know how to help you. So he kicks me out instead," she sighed, pressing her lips together. "You're stronger than you think. Maybe this will push you forward." Then she left, and I realized she wasn't wrong. Maybe I was stronger than I thought. But I also knew she wasn't telling me everything. That night, when everyone was asleep, I slipped out the back door with a flashlight. The air was sharp and still. I walked to the shed, heart hammering. The padlock gleamed under the beam. I crouched down and noticed fresh dirt near the base, like someone had been digging. I touched the soil. Cold. Damp. Recently disturbed. Before I could process it, I heard footsteps behind me. "Dorothy." I froze. My father's voice cut through the dark, low and commanding. "What are you doing?" I turned slowly, the flashlight shaking in my hand. "I was just..." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "That's private property." "Private property?" I repeated, stunned. "It's our backyard." "Not anymore," he said flatly. "We sold part of the lot last month." I blinked, trying to understand. "You what? You didn't even tell me?" "There was no reason to," he replied. "You're not staying." The words hit harder this time, cutting through the chill. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but instead I said quietly, "What are you hiding out here, Dad?" His jaw tightened. "Don't start imagining things, Dorothy. You always do that when you're upset." He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving me standing in the cold with my questions hanging in the air. But as I stared at the shed, at that perfect, 2-new lock glinting under moonlight, I knew this wasn't over. Something was buried here, literally or otherwise. And before I left this house for good, I was going to find out what it was. The next few days felt like living inside someone else's house. Every word exchanged was clipped, rehearsed, the kind you say to people you owe politeness, not love. My father buried himself in errands. My mother moved quietly between rooms, humming songs she didn't used to like. And Ethan was gone most of the time, working late or pretending to. But I couldn't stop thinking about the shed. At night, I heard noises, faint metallic clinks, low thuds from outside. I told myself it was just raccoons or wind, but deep down I knew better. Something was happening out there. On the fourth night, I decided to see for myself. I waited until the house was silent. The clock on my nightstand blinked 2:37 a.m. The air was thick, electric. I slipped on a hoodie and crept downstairs. The back door groaned softly when I opened it, but no one stirred. The shed sat under the moonlight, quiet and almost expectant. I walked toward it, the grass cold under my bare feet. The lock was still there. I knelt, heart pounding, and ran my fingers along the doorframe. The wood was new, smoother than the old garden fence. Then I noticed something, a faint crack along the lower panel. When I pressed it, it moved slightly. I found a small gap, enough to slip the flashlight beam through. Inside, I saw shelves stacked with boxes, labeled in neat handwriting. And in the corner, a metal cabinet, locked. But what caught my eye was something draped with a tarp in the center, large, bulky, the shape impossible to mistake. A generator. Industrial grade. The kind used for fieldwork. The kind my old company used for environmental sampling projects. What was it doing here? Before I could process the thought, a voice cut through the darkness. Dorothy. It was my mother. She stood by the back steps, her robe pulled tight, her face pale in the moonlight. "Why can't you just leave it alone?" she whispered. Her tone wasn't angry. It was scared. "Mom," I said, stepping closer. "What's going on here? What's that equipment doing in the shed?" She looked down, shaking her head. "You don't understand. It's not ours. It's borrowed." "Borrowed?" I repeated. "From who?" Before she could answer, the porch light snapped on. My father appeared, fully dressed, his voice sharp and controlled. "That's enough, Margaret. Go inside." But she didn't move. Her eyes were glassy, trembling. "She has a right to know, Frank," she said quietly. He turned to me. "You want the truth, Dorothy?" "Fine." He walked toward me, slow and deliberate. "Your company, the one that cut you off last quarter, subcontracted environmental testing to firms like mine. We've been using their samples to get funding, to keep this place afloat." I frowned, trying to understand. "You mean, you stole their equipment?" He didn't answer. My mother whispered, "He said it was temporary, just until the audit clears. He said no one would notice." I stared at them, disbelief curdling into anger. "You're running illegal tests from our backyard?" My father's voice hardened. "Don't say that word. You think I wanted this? You think retirement pays for your brother's college loans? This house, the taxes? Someone had to make a choice." I stepped back. "So you chose fraud?" "Survival," he corrected, eyes glinting. "You wouldn't understand. You've never had to carry anyone but yourself." The words cut deeper than I expected. But something else broke inside me too, the illusion that this house had ever been a safe place. I turned toward the shed. "You built this to hide it, didn't you? That's why you're selling the lot. To erase the evidence." "Dorothy," my mother whispered again, pleading now. "Please don't get involved. If the company finds out, we could lose everything." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who once told me to always stand for what's right, even if it costs you comfort. Now she was asking me to bury the truth. "I can't," I said softly. "Not this time." My father stepped forward, fury cracking his calm. "You'll do nothing. You're leaving tomorrow. We're done discussing this." He stormed back inside. The door slammed. My mother stayed, tears catching the porch light. "He's not a bad man," she whispered. "He's just tired." "We both are." I didn't answer. Because in that moment, I wasn't sure who they were anymore, or who I was, standing between them and the ruin they built. By dawn, I'd packed the last of my boxes into my car. The sky was soft pink, the air heavy with dew. My mother stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. "You're really going?" she asked quietly. "I have to," I said. "And Mom?" "You should too." She didn't reply, just nodded faintly. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in my rearview mirror. The shed stood out like a scar against the lawn. I didn't know where I was going, just that it was somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't built on secrets. And as the sun broke over the horizon, I whispered to myself, I'm done asking for permission. Because for the first time in years, the road ahead was mine. Uncertain maybe, but mine. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a half-empty apartment with one suitcase, one plant, and the kind of silence that feels like a bruise slowly healing. The first nights away from home were brutal, not because I missed the place, but because I missed the illusion of safety it once gave me. That false sense of belonging. I thought freedom would feel like wind and sunlight. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with no map. But that was before the email arrived. It was from my former colleague, Cynthia, the project coordinator from my old firm. Subject line: missing equipment and unusual testing reports. My chest tightened as I read. The company had launched an internal review after discovering inconsistencies in their environmental audit files connected to one of my old assignments. They were trying to trace the equipment's last known location, and I knew exactly where it was. I stared at the screen for a long time, torn between two instincts: protect my family or tell the truth. Then I remembered my father's words. You'll do nothing. He had said it like an order, like I was still that little girl afraid to raise her voice at the dinner table. Not anymore. I called Cynthia. My voice was calm, steady. I told her everything: the shed, the generator, the stolen data. She was silent for a long time, then whispered, Dorothy, do you realize what this means? I did. It meant my family could face legal action. It meant I was the one who lit the match. But it also meant I was finally standing for something again. The next few days blurred into reports, interviews, and phone calls. The company filed a quiet complaint, and federal auditors got involved. My father's name appeared in the investigation documents, not as a criminal, but as a subcontractor under review. When the news reached him, he didn't call. Not once, my mother did. Her voice cracked through the phone. They came this morning, she said. They took the equipment. Your father's furious. He says you've ruined us. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my forehead. No, Mom. I stopped you from ruining yourselves. There was silence. Then a small, broken sound, like the breath of someone who had been holding it for too long. I know, she whispered. I just wish you hadn't had to be the one. After that, we didn't talk again for weeks. I threw myself into work, taking short-term environmental projects. Small, local, but honest. I rode buses instead of driving. I learned to make soup from scratch, to sleep without checking my phone, to start fresh without needing anyone's approval. Freedom began to feel less like falling, more like flying low. One evening, I got a letter. A real one. Envelope, handwriting, stamp. It was from my mother. Inside was a short note. The house is quieter now. Your father barely speaks. They found nothing illegal enough to charge him, but he's selling the property anyway. The shed is gone. I wanted you to know that I'm moving in with your aunt for a while. You were right, Dorothy, about all of it. I'm proud of you, even if it took me too long to say it. There was a small photo tucked inside. The backyard. Grass regrown, the sky wide and clear. I sat with that letter for a long time, sunlight spilling across my floor. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was something real. That weekend, I drove past my old neighborhood. The for sale sign stood crooked in front of the house. Windows dark, curtains drawn. The place looked smaller now, like a chapter folded neatly shut. For a moment, I almost stopped. Almost walked up to the porch, but I didn't. Because I wasn't the same woman who left that house in the rearview mirror. I parked by the lake instead, the one Ethan and I used to visit as kids. The air smelled of pine and water. I sat on the hood of my car, staring at the rippling surface. It was quiet. Not empty, just peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running or hiding. The world hadn't gotten simpler. But I had. My phone buzzed. A message from Cynthia. Congrats. They reinstated your certification. The board knows you did the right thing. I smiled. A slow, tired smile. Maybe I had lost a house, a father's approval, a version of my past. But I'd reclaimed something far more precious, my voice. And as the sun dipped low, turning the lake to gold, I whispered, to no one and everyone, sometimes to build your own life, you have to burn down the one that was never yours to begin with. The wind carried the words away, and I let them go.